appellate jurisdiction, in theory, the Supreme Court could say that's unconstitutional, right? Now, that might cause a constitutional crisis. I don't think it would really happen. Okay, now the other curveball, of course, is that even original jurisdiction, if you think about it, all right, what's delineated in Article 3 actually could be changed by constitutional amendment, right? So again, as we had mentioned in our Constitution chapter, again, the framework of American government, separation of powers and checks and balances is absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Now, you can criticize it and say it's slow, or it doesn't move fast enough or something like that. It's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Okay, now, number 8 on our list, of course, is always presidential nomination and Senate confirmation, right? Again, that's the chief check and balance you think about when it comes to the United States Supreme Court. Certainly makes sense. But again, once you do this, once the president puts somebody nominates somebody for the United States Supreme Court and the Senate confirms them, again, you might be locked in for about a 30-year run. Again, Justice Kennedy, who is just now stepping off, spent 30 years of his career on the United States Supreme Court, so even a little over a generation. All right. Now, lastly, and one that I like to talk about because I think it's certainly social, but it also has a legal impact as well. One of the things that we often forget about, and again, when we get into the civil rights cases, not so much civil liberties stuff, but the civil rights cases, the United States Supreme Court does not have its own police force. It does not have its little team of police officers that can go out and enforce its own opinions. One of the chief checks against the United States Supreme Court, and this is number 8 on our list, all right, is the fact that the United States Supreme Court depends on the executive branch to enforce its judicial decisions, okay? Now, probably the best example of this, and again, when we get into the civil rights cases, we'll actually see this, all right, is when the United States Supreme Court was ruling time and time again that the public schools needed to be desegregated based on race. And you had governors, you had state legislatures, local school district officials, what have you, that just simply wouldn't do it. Right? Now, there's a lot of political pressure, a lot of bad political pressure, we'll call it what it is, and they simply wouldn't move. It was required that the federal government actually step in a law enforcement capacity. Now, that meant both law enforcement at the federal level as well as military troops to take care of some of this. And again, our history does have some negative reality associated with it when it comes to desegregation, and it's something that's incredibly powerful. So again, there are checks by the Supreme or on the Supreme Court that really limit the Supreme Court's flexibility in terms of interpreting the Constitution. So yeah, maybe there are 4 methods of interpreting the Constitution, and you can put 3 in a conservative box and 1 of them in a liberal box, but there are, again, these checks, some social, some mechanical, some a little bit of both, that limit the discretion of the United States Supreme Court. Okay, now let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the various types of opinions that a Supreme Court, or really any other court, could write, but we're just going to focus on the United States Supreme Court. So again, you get a decision from the United States Supreme Court, and I'm going to give you one on Monday, and we're going to work through it a little bit. All right. There are 5 different types of decisions, opinions rather, 5 different types of opinions that can be found in a particular Supreme Court decision. We start with the majority opinion. All right, now the majority opinion, all right, is written by 5 or more justices, right, or at least a majority of justices. Now I'm going to talk about the plurality counterpart to this here in a second, all right, whereby they give us the actual precedent. Okay, they actually give us the rule of law. The actual precedent is going to be found in the majority opinion, right? So you have 9 justices, right? So a majority opinion could be 5-4, 6-3, 7-2, 8-1, or unanimous in the sense it would be 9-0, right? 9 justices against nobody, right? Okay, now, with that said, all right, the majority, be it 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, right? They write the opinion, right? That counts as a matter of law. Okay? Now, it's not to say that you should completely discount the other types of opinions, but that's the one that counts. It's the majority that counts. Now, enter politics, right? And you can see how important having a 5-4 majority is, right? Now, with Justice Kavanaugh coming to the United States Supreme Court, we really do have a pretty clear 5-4 majority whereby the Supreme Court is leaning to the right. And again, if you followed the confirmation proceedings, and frankly, we could back up quite a bit and look at the presidential campaigns over the last 30 years. It's really been dominated by this idea of what's the Supreme Court going to look like? Will there be a majority in terms of the left or the right, or will you have 3 on the left, 3 on the right, maybe 3 somewhat centrist justices? Anthony Kennedy, who just left the Supreme Court, really kind of started out as a conservative and then kind of worked his way to the middle. He wound up being that swing vote. Now you really don't have a swing vote, all right? You've got 5 on one side and 4 on the other. We're going to have a lot of 5-4 decisions here for a while. Okay, a concurring opinion. Now, very important and sometimes I think understated. A concurring opinion is written by a justice who agrees with the rule of law, agrees with the majority on the outcome, right? So yes, it is constitutional to give public money to religious schools in the form of a voucher program, all right? So they would agree with it, but for different reasons. They have a different philosophy. So you read the majority opinion, and it has the rule of law, all right, and the philosophy held by those justices signing on the majority opinion, okay? A concurring justice agrees with the rule of law, but for different reasons, right? They have a different idea as to why the school voucher programs might be constitutional. Okay, now here's the curveball I'm going to throw at you, all right? When adding up the score, 5-4, 6-3, 7-2, 8-1, 9-0, all right, you do include the concurring justices. Why? Because they're signing on to the rule of law, but they want to state their own theory, their own opinion. Now, this is something that's somewhat unusual in terms of judicial practice around the world. Most of the time around the world, the court says, here's our opinion, that's it. It's generally much shorter than what we write too. But there's no concurring opinion, and there's no other opinions that we'll look at here in terms of dissenting. Okay. All right, now, dissenting opinions are written by justices who disagree with the rule of law. They disagree with the majority. They said, you know what, you guys got it wrong. That in our scenario we're using here, looking at school voucher programs, no, they are unconstitutional. You guys got it wrong, right? This is why. Okay. Now, you might say, well, you know, a dissenting justice lost, right? They're part of the 4 of the 5-4, part of the 3 of the 6-3, part of the 2 of the 7-2, part of the 1 of the 8-1, right? So why they lost? Why waste time? Why write an actual opinion? Well, here's why. These judges and justices, and again focusing on justices in the United States Supreme Court, they want to preserve, right, their philosophy for later generations, right? So the idea is they say, you know what, maybe this is the rule of law now, but in the future, I want somebody to see my dissenting opinion and someday erase dissenting and make it a majority opinion, okay? Now, a classic example of this is just what we were talking about earlier, aside from the school vouchers, but talking about the separate but equal doctrine, all right? Justice John Marshall Harlan I wrote the only dissenting opinion in an 8-1 decision in Plessy versus Ferguson, where the United States Supreme Court said, yes, you can have places of public accommodation separate as long as they're equal. And John Marshall Harlan wrote, said, no, you guys got it wrong. He was the only one. He said, no, you guys got it wrong. All right? Separate is inherently unequal. Right? The Constitution is colorblind. There's no way you guys could come to this decision. All right? 58 years later, a unanimous Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education, right, 9-0 said, you know what? That guy 58 years ago got it right. Okay? So, again, there's a great story behind it that I'll share with you when we get to that particular case, but we're a little ways away from it. Okay? All right, now, Dissenting justices, again, they're going to be part of the 4 of the 5-4, the 3 of the 6-3, the 2 of the 7-2, the 1 of the 8-1. Okay? All right, now, a couple other types of opinions. A per curiam opinion written by the United States Supreme Court is generally very short. It's often anonymous, and more likely than not, it's going to be unanimous. Okay, it's short, anonymous, and unanimous. There's not a whole lot to it. These are decisions that tend to be very, very quickly written. Often the Supreme Court says, you know, maybe we really shouldn't have heard this one. We dug a little bit deeper. We agreed to hear it, right? We employed our rule of 4. We wanted to hear it. Now that we've dug a little bit deeper, probably wasn't that big a deal. It happens, right? Okay, but there have been some pivotal decisions that were per curiam decisions. Again, generally short, generally unanimous, generally anonymous. Some exceptions to those 3. You can have a long per curiam opinion, in other words. Okay, and then lastly, a plurality opinion. Okay, plurality opinions are real curveballs. Okay, essentially the court doesn't have a majority. So let's say there's a vacancy, and again, we had a vacancy for quite some time on the United States Supreme Court. But let's say you have a vacancy, right? And you've got 8 justices, a 4-4 decision. Okay, now if you have a 4-3 decision, that's okay. All right, that will count as a majority, and that's why I said we were going to talk about a majority opinion when we got to plurality again. 4-3 is okay if you had 2 vacancies, but a 4-4 opinion, or let's say a 4-3-2 opinion, right? That one gets a little hairy, and you have to read through it and then decide. Now, when I said 4-3-2, a lot of times you can get justices that just simply aren't agreeing to anything. Okay, this happens. It's rare, but it happens. Okay, now I want you certainly to know that, but the most important part that you would want to know about a plurality decision is it has only the effect of maintaining precedent. In other words, you can't change precedent with a plurality opinion. All right, just can't happen. All right, so when we're down a justice like we were here for a while, after Justice Scalia's death, and we hadn't we hadn't confirmed Justice or judicial candidate Merrick Garland for a while due to a lot of what was going on in the political world in terms of the campaigns. We had some of these, all right? We had some of these cases. Okay, all right, now a little bit on the voting and writing procedures with the United States Supreme Court. Now, again, the Supreme Court is really rich in tradition, okay? We talked a little bit about the rule of 4, the fact that the justices, you know, for no other reasons, need 4 justices, not in the Constitution, it's not a statute. They've just decided, hey, 4 of us out of 9 have to agree to hear the decision. All right, couple of things. Now, when it comes to voting, all right, the justice with the least tenure, right, votes, and you go sequentially through the justice with the greatest tenure, all right? So right now, all right, it's going to be Justice Kavanaugh, all right, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's been around longer than anybody else, would essentially vote last. Now, in terms of writing procedures, who gets to write the majority opinion? Okay. Now, again, this is very, very rich in tradition. I find it interesting. The evolution of this, I find interesting. I just want you to know, if this were a constitutional history class, we could spend more time with it. It'd be kind of fun. But the question becomes, who gets to write the majority opinion? Okay. If the Chief Justice is in the majority, the Chief Justice gets to choose who writes the majority opinion, all right? So for right now, if Chief Justice John Roberts is in the majority, then he gets to pick who writes the majority opinion. Now, he can choose himself, by the way, right? Especially if it's a high-profile case, and say, hey, I want to do this on my own, okay? Now, the flip side of this, what happens if the Chief Justice is not in the majority? If the Chief Justice is not in the majority, then the justice with the most seniority gets to choose who would write, right, the majority opinion. So let's say there's a 5-4 decision and Justice Ginsburg is in the majority and Chief Justice John Roberts is in the dissent, right? Well, would it be actually Justice Ginsburg that would get to decide who writes the majority opinion? Now, by the way, Justice Ginsburg can certainly choose herself as well. So it's really, again, it's interesting how it's steeped in tradition. Okay, now what about choosing judges on the state level? All right, let's talk about judges on the state level. Now, again, all federal judges, right, are nominated and confirmed. All Article 3 judges get to keep their jobs for life, right? And Article 1 judges have limited terms. So we mentioned when we were drawing the court system, looking at the state system against the federal system all in the same chart, bankruptcy judges get 14-year terms. Okay, now, how do they do it at the state level, right? Well, if you're an Ohioan, right, and you've been paying attention to what's going on in politics, right? We're roughly 3 weeks away, actually a little less than that, 3 weeks away from an election. You notice you got a lot of these people running for judicial positions. They're running for office to become a judge, right? You're like, well, wait a minute. Is this different than federal judges? And the answer is yes, right? So at the state level, right, states can pretty much do whatever they want. Okay, so we're just going to look quickly at 5 methods by which states actually select their judges. The first is through partisan election. So you run for judge as a Democrat. You run for judge as a Republican, just like any other candidate. Okay. The next type, the nonpartisan election. You run for judge, but not as a Republican or a Democrat. You just run for judge with no party affiliation. Now, this is actually how we do it in Ohio. Hint, 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 right? You'll notice that candidates might be endorsed by a party, all right? Candidates probably are tied to a political party in one way or another. They've probably been an active member of a political party, probably helping out other candidates for a long time, all right? Generally, if you don't have to dig too deep to find out which candidates are Republicans and which ones are Democrats. The reality here is, rather, in states such as Ohio, they don't run as a Republican or as a Democrat, right? So when you go to the ballot that day, you're just looking at names, right? You're not looking at political party affiliation. Now, again, it's a little sneakier because, again, if you don't have to dig too deep to actually find out whether somebody's a Republican or a Democrat. You'll see the Republican Party endorses candidate so-and-so. The Democratic Party endorses so-and-so. The Green Party, Libertarian Party, etc. Okay, now, number 3, gubernatorial selection. This is about as close to what we have in the federal system, all right, that you're going to find. So what happens here is the governor appoints the judges in that particular state. Okay, right? Just like the president nominating, the United States president nominating candidates for the judicial positions in the Article 3 courts and the Article 1 courts. Now, in many of these gubernatorial selection systems, actually one or both of the houses of the legislature, the state legislature, also confirm, but I just want you to know that the governor is actually involved in starting the process. Okay, number 4, the legislative appointment. Now, here, the state legislature has complete control and the governor plays no role. So it's actually the state legislature that gets together and chooses a judge, right? Anytime there's a vacancy, they just stick somebody in there. Now, one of the things I will tell you throughout this process, and I'll mention it now, is that you can have partisan elections and nonpartisan elections, and it makes sense that they have a limited term. In Ohio, 6 years, and then you got to go run for office again. Even with gubernatorial selection and legislative appointment in the state systems, there can be limited terms. Okay, Ohio in the late 80s actually flirted with going with a gubernatorial selection and life tenure for a particular level of judges, and just it didn't take. Okay, largely we didn't agree to it at the ballot box. Okay, and then lastly is a funky little system called the merit system. Okay, now this, in most states that have a merit system, it looks kind of like a recall system, right? Governor's involved, state legislature's involved. You get that person in a judgeship, and then what happens is that they're subject to a recall vote. Should we keep them? Should we not? So they're nominated, confirmed, stay on the court for a while, a few years, probably 4, and then there's a recall. Should we keep them? Should we not? All right. So you're kind of electing them after they've had like a tryout term, right? To see if you want to keep them. And in most of these merit selections, it's if you vote to keep them, then you're going to keep them for life tenure. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll stop here. On Monday, we will finish up the court system, but again, I want to have it on the board and kind of go through it a little bit. And then we'll pick up here with why go to court, and then certainly be well into civil rights and civil liberties. All right, see you Monday.